questions from you all. Everyone's got an opinion on this, and so we are glad that you have come to the NAACP to get clarity and information around the decision. And so I want to go through our agenda and make sure folks know what's coming up for the call, and then we will dive into some conversation. So we're going to have our president and CEO, Mr. Derek Johnson, just set the table, let us understand what's before us. We are going to talk about what the Supreme Court did, what happened. We'll have a panel discussion with some of our representatives. We'll have a short break for some audience Q&A. We're going to talk about the states of play because this is just the beginning and we see things breaking off in states all over. We will then have a call to action, and then we will move into closing remarks. And so as we bring up our president and CEO to bring us our opening remarks, I encourage you all to continue. I see our NAACPers are doing it right now. You're dropping your name in the chat. You're dropping your unit. You're dropping where you're from. We know this call has both NAACPers and allies alike. So we encourage you, let us know where you're from, what org you're from. We welcome you into this call. And with that, I'm going to pass the call over to President Derek Johnson to bring his remarks.
Thank you, Phaedra, and good evening, everyone. If it appears as if I'm in a box, I am. I'm at the airport, but I thought this call was too important to delay. Yesterday's Supreme Court decision is one in which the NAACP, we must respond to. We must be strategic and we must stay focused. What the Supreme Court essentially did is undo the most significant piece of policy legislation of the civil rights movement. That's the Voting Rights Act. It is the paramount of all of the rights for this democracy. Our ability to exercise our vote or our franchise and cast an effective ballot is absolutely essential to ensure that we can impact the formation of public policy and determine the quality of life for our communities. This current Supreme Court made a decision that flies in the face of both logic, legal reason, and nonpartisanship. It is an activist judge. It would probably go down in the history book as one of three of the worst Supreme Court decisions in the history of this nation. First, Dred Scott, where the court said Blacks had no rights that whites were bound to uphold. And then secondly, the decision of Plessy versus Ferguson, where the illogical decision of separate but equal, anything that's separate will be inherently unequal if you allow one community to have decision-making over the other community. The Voting Rights Act is key because we have come through a history of denial of our ability to fully engage as citizens and exercise our right to vote. The panel this evening, the conversation this evening would highlight several factors. I am proud that we now have Kristen Clark as our general counsel. She will walk through some of the basic points around the decision. The leader of the House, I call him the leader, the former whip, Congressman Clyburn, can kind of give us an understanding of why this decision is important, particularly for Congressional Black Caucus members in the South, where a majority of Black people live, and also Congresswoman Sewell, who is carrying the legacy of John Lewis in pursuit of reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act. With that said, I hope you are clear, stay tuned. So when you are asked about the Supreme Court decision in your local communities, you are informed enough to respond with the level of understanding. And then finally, our field team will issue a call of action. What are the things we need to do in response to this? What are the things that we are doing in states like Louisiana, in Florida, what we have done in Virginia, and how governors like in Mississippi are going to try to leverage this moment to undo over 55 plus years of progress that we have made. So I'll stop there, Phaedra. I'm eager to listen to the panelists, and I hope everyone who joined us this evening will be tuned in, focused, so that we can go to the next stage of this war that we're in. It's only a battle, only a quick setback, but the war, we will prevail.
Thank you so much, President Johnson. And as we get ready to transition, I do want to flag that, you all have packed out this call. We are already at capacity, but the great news is we are live streaming on YouTube. So if someone is trying to get into this call and they're unable to do so, fret not. We are streaming to YouTube, and so folks can hop over to the NAACP YouTube channel and see the exact same content that we're presenting on this Zoom. And as we bring up our general counsel, as President Johnson said, we are so excited to have a foremost expert on this subject to really break down what happened. And so I'm going to pass it over to you, Madam General Counsel Kristen Clark.
Thank you so much, and good evening. I want to first thank President Johnson for helping set the stage for us this evening. Again, the Supreme Court issued truly one of the most devastating decisions of the 21st century yesterday, Louisiana versus Calais. I want to walk through the ruling, talk briefly about how we got here, outline the implications of the ruling, and then set forth our call to action. The Voting Rights Act is the crown jewel of civil rights legislation, and it is the most important civil rights law ever passed by Congress. And without question, this decision strikes at one of the last remaining core provisions of the law, Section 2. Now, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is a tool that we have been using for decades. It has been used by civil rights organizations like the NAACP for years to address attacks on our right to vote. It's been used to challenge discriminatory redistricting maps and other things like cuts to early voting and cuts to mail voting, where we have the evidence that shows that these kinds of policy changes harm Black voters and other voters of color. It's been a powerful tool in fighting back against voting discrimination. That is not a thing of the past. The work that we do at the NAACP makes clear that voting discrimination is alive and well in our country. And I want to be very clear about that, because there's a lot of talk about partisanship right now and about Democrats and Republicans, but what we see too often in our democracy are officials who are bent on locking Black people and other people of color out of the democratic process. So this case, again, focused on Louisiana's congressional map that contained 2 majority Black districts. And that map had been challenged as an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. After the 2020 census, Louisiana adopted a map that had a single majority Black district, 1 out of 6, even though Louisiana has a sizable Black population of about 33%. After a legal challenge mounted by the NAACP and our partners, a judge found that Louisiana likely violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and required the state to draw a second majority Black district that's currently held by Congressman Leo Fields. And you can see that district there in green, district number 6. Shortly after, a group of white voters challenged that map, claiming it violated the Constitution by, quote, sorting voters based on race. And on appeal, a 3-judge court agreed and barred Louisiana from using the map with 1 majority Black district in future elections. But a divided Supreme Court pressed pause on that ruling in 2024. The Supreme Court took up the case and heard oral arguments last spring. But then the court took the unusual step of asking the parties to re-argue the case once again. And many voting rights lawyers saw this as a potential sign that the Supreme Court intended to do more harm with this case. Now, the case from yesterday, I want to start with the dissent because I thought Justice Kagan was very crystal clear. She noted in her dissent that the court was rendering the Voting Rights Act all but a dead letter. So let me just say a brief word about what the majority opinion does here. The majority opinion provides that a violation of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act from this point going forward can only be shown when we have strong evidence that intentional discrimination has occurred. So the court literally took on the role of lawmaker here by rewriting the statute and eliminated our ability to put forth evidence, including expert analysis of election data and so forth, that might show that a redistricting map has a discriminatory effect on Black voters. And I'll tell you that voting rights lawyers have been bringing these kinds of cases to the courts for years. It is not often that lawmakers lay bare their racial motive or their intent to discriminate against us. And so by stripping away our ability to show that a racially gerrymandered map or some kind of voting change has a discriminatory effect on Black voters, and saying that we can only show this when we have smoking gun evidence of intentional discrimination, is devastating. And it runs contrary to Congress's intent. In fact, the Supreme Court issued a similar ruling in 1980 in a case called Mobile versus Bolden. They said, if you want to bring a case under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, you have to show intent. And Congress amended the law in 1982 to make clear that no, you can prove cases by showing discriminatory effect as well. So what Justice Alito did yesterday is he literally chose to rewrite the law. And in so doing, he has demolished Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. In his words, we just need to update the framework. It is one of the most indefensible acts of judicial overreach that we have seen in modern time. This is a Supreme Court that is bringing to fruition a decades-long strategy to destroy the Voting Rights Act and our civil rights laws in general. Now, let's talk about partisanship. We are seeing mid-decade partisan gerrymandering of maps at rates that we have not seen in modern time. A few years ago, the Supreme Court issued a ruling in a case called Rucho versus Common Cause, where the court said, we think there might be something afoot here, but we just can't come up with a standard to really suss out when partisan gerrymandering has crossed the line. So we wash our hands of this business of partisan gerrymandering. Interestingly, though, yesterday, Justice Alito reminded us that federal courts can't consider partisan gerrymandering claims. And he also said something interesting. He said that litigants can easily exploit Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act for partisan purposes by repackaging a partisan gerrymandering claim and trying to pass it off as a racial gerrymandering claim. This is deeply offensive to the NAACP community and those of us who faithfully work to enforce the law in the face of real ongoing discrimination in our democracy. In the end, Alito found that Louisiana's goal in adopting this map was, quote, racial. I'll just say Justice Clarence Thomas issued a very short concurrence. He said that this decision puts an end to the disastrous misadventure in voting rights jurisprudence. But the dissent really is what is worth shining a light on here. Justice Kagan's dissent was incredibly powerful. She noted that, and accurately so, the Voting Rights Act was born of the literal blood of Union soldiers and civil rights marchers. The law ushered in awe-inspiring change, bringing this nation closer to fulfilling the ideals of democracy and racial equality. Spot on. As she notes, states need do nothing more than strike Black majority districts down and call it a partisan gerrymander. It is a devastating decision any way that you slice or dice it. So how did we get here? Again, this case did not arise in a vacuum. This court has been tearing it and working to gut the Voting Rights Act for well over a decade. 2013, the Supreme Court issued a decision in Shelby County, Alabama versus Holder that gutted a different part of the Voting Rights Act, the Section 5 preclearance provision that required certain states like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and others to get federal review of their voting changes before they could be put into effect. And we've seen a tidal wave of voting discrimination since the Shelby County decision. So that was one huge gut punch. Justice Ginsburg, in her dissent in the Shelby case, said that getting rid of the Section 5 preclearance provision was like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. In other words, preclearance was one of the only reason that we were able to stop a lot of these states from discriminating against us when it comes to voting. There was another Supreme Court case that I mentioned very briefly, Rucho versus Common Cause, where the Supreme Court again just said, partisan gerrymandering, we just can't figure out a standard for dealing with this. It's too hard, too complicated, which is why in part we've seen partisan gerrymandering unleashed across the country right now. But the other dot that I want to connect here is the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard case, which struck down affirmative action or race-conscious admissions in the higher ed context. Again, this is part of a strategy that we have been seeing from this court to tear down our civil rights laws, to turn a blind eye to racial discrimination, and to eliminate race-conscious remedies that have played a powerful tool in our democracy. So, the implications of the ruling. First, I'll note that the civil rights community has been really unified in this moment across the board. We view this as a blow to democracy, but we are organized, we are rallying, we are coming together in this moment to confront the legal realities of this decision. But we're starting to see the fallout in places like Florida. An hour after the decision was announced, Florida put forth a new map that eliminates 4 seats. And no doubt this will have a devastating effect on Black voters and voters of color. In Mississippi, we know that the governor has promised a special session to have districts redrawn. Mississippi has 1 majority Black district. This is a state with the largest Black population in the country. And there are other states where we may see fallout. We are watching very closely in Tennessee, where Senator Blackburn has set her sights on striking down a majority Black district in the Memphis area. And we're keeping an eye on Alabama and Georgia as well. And we're deeply concerned about our Congressional Black Caucus and many of the districts that they represent. And we also know that there is the potential for this decision to have an effect at the state legislative level, at the city council level, and the school board level as well. So what now? What will the NAACP's Office of General Counsel do in response to yesterday's ruling? At the federal level, there are some things we need to do. First, we need to keep the push, keep the press on for passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And we need other strong voting rights legislation to shore up our right to vote. At the federal level, we should also start to lay the groundwork for a constitutional amendment that affirmatively guarantees the right to vote for all American citizens. This won't be achieved overnight, but now's the moment to raise our voices and start laying the groundwork for this kind of bold reform. And everybody is questioning this Supreme Court right now. We need to have a real conversation about the need for Supreme Court reform so that we can have a court that is fair and independent. At the state level, there's some other things that we can do. I want to acknowledge a number of states across the country that have already adopted state voting rights acts. Those include states like California, Washington, Oregon, Virginia, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Minnesota, Colorado, and California. And we've got new states, New Jersey and Maryland, that are standing up and recently have adopted state voting rights acts. And there's been legislation proposed in places like Georgia, Michigan, Oklahoma, and Rhode Island. But this is the push. This is the push that we as NAACP members should be making in our states right now. Now, at the state and local level, I mentioned that we may see fallout. We may see states and cities seeking to cause mischief in the wake of this ruling. And so this is a moment where we will all need to activate to engage in any special or emergency session that may be launched in our communities. We will be working through our NAACP units to ensure that our members are ready to show up for any hearing or session that is called. We call on our NAACP units in all communities to participate in these hearings, make sure your voices are heard, call for and insist on fair maps. We need to make sure that we are building a record that puts officials on blast when they are targeting majority Black districts or districts that have long provided voters of color an opportunity to elect candidates of choice. And we need to educate our members on the current state of the law in your respective states. So expect more of that in the road ahead. Next, although it may be difficult, know that the NAACP will file lawsuits based on intentional discrimination. Those suits are challenging, and Justice Alito knows it. But where we suss out lawmakers that are targeting Black voters and targeting voters of color, we will file lawsuits, but anticipate more litigation in state courts under state constitutional provisions and under state voting rights acts where they are in place. There is a path forward. And then finally, vote. Vote like you have never voted before, because this midterm election cycle is absolutely consequential to the fate of our democracy. This is a devastating decision, but we are ready to march forward, use the tools that we have, raise our voices, and ensure that every one of us has a voice in this midterm election season. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam General Counsel. We are here. I see you already taking it into the chat. Everyone, go ahead and type vote because our lives actually do depend on it. And so that is our battle cry. As we begin to move into the next section, General Counsel has talked about what just happened, what the Supreme Court did, and now we want to have a panel discussion or a deep discussion about where do we go from here. So as we bring up our panelists, I also want to encourage folks, please put your questions in the Q&A. We know we won't be able to answer them all in real time. There's thousands of you on this call, and you've got hundreds and hundreds of questions. But if you are putting them in the Q&A, we are committing to create an FAQ and get that back out to you over the next couple of days so that we can answer as many of your questions as possible. As you see, the chat is going insane. We will never be able to find your questions in the chat. But if you put them in the Q&A, we have staff that are answering it in real time as quickly as they can. And we are also going to put FAQs. So thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so let's move into this panel. I'm going to bring up our moderator, Mr. Vincent Evans, and he will be joined by Congressman James Clyburn. And we will round out this conversation with, we'll bring back our General Counsel, Ms. Kristen Clark. This is a really great conversation. I'm excited for you all to have. And be sure you're dropping your questions in the chat because we will have a little bit of Q&A after this panel. Vincent, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Phaedra, and thank you to the NAACP. Like Phaedra said, I'm Executive Director of the Congressional Black Caucus, and we are joined tonight by one of the most senior members of our caucus, but more than that, a leader for a time such as this. I know we'll probably also in a few moments be joined by Congresswoman Terry Sewell of Alabama. I want to go, because I don't want to waste time, I want to go directly to Congressman Clyburn. Congressman Clyburn, you started out many decades ago in the fight for civil rights. You and your late wife, Emily, met in a jail, did work and protesting. Could you have imagined, and how are you processing this moment, that the very fights you started early in your life and decades ago, you are now seeing the crowning achievement of the civil rights movement eviscerated yesterday?
Well, thank you very much, Vincent, for the question, and thanks to all of you who are joining us this evening. And Kristen, thank you for that great overview. You are a crown jewel for us in this movement. To answer your question, when I first started out with all of this, I used to really believe that you are at a point that may be A, and you'll go out to B, C, D, and you go out ad infinitum, and we will all be in pursuit of a more perfect union. But then I started studying the backgrounds of the history that I used to teach. Now, when I taught history in the public schools down in South Carolina, I didn't like the history books. And so I started doing research to develop my lesson plans outside of the textbook. And I started running into stuff that made me come to the conclusion that our society moves like a pendulum on a clock. It goes right for a while, then it goes back left, and then it goes back right. And if you come down through all of our history, you can find that to be the case. So I started some years ago to see this as a future that we should be prepared for. And as Vincent recalled, I started saying in our caucus meetings years ago that anything that's happened before can happen again. And that's why I wrote this book, The First 8, because I saw all of this stuff that brought an end to those careers and brought 95 years between number 8, the last African-American to serve in Congress from South Carolina, to me, and number 9, and I saw these things bubbling up again. And so years ago, I came to the conclusion that we were headed to where we are. And now the question is, and I think it's a great question, the title of Martin Luther King Jr.'s last book, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Let me offer a couple of suggestions. Section 2, this decision, as Kristen mentioned, takes us back to Section 2. I remember Mobile B. Bolden very well. They had a 3-council government, 3-person government that ran, and they were all 3 of them were at large, and they ran all the elections, and they ran the cities. And so when that was challenged, it's when the Supreme Court came out with its intent test. In 1982, I testified, along with others, before the Congress. I believe it was Congressman Edwards was the chair of that committee from California. And I argued at that time against intent in favor of results. Well, we finally got results. Quite frankly, the civil rights community was divided on that because the argument was let's not raise any new issues. Let's just get a simple extension of Section 5. Well, I didn't think that was good enough. Well, the group that I was with won that argument, and we got the results test. So what this decision does is just take us back to the intent test, just throughout the results test. So what should we do in response to that? Christian, I think that we in the Congress, with your help, need to take a look at this decision and take a look at the John R. Lewis Voting Rights and Advancement Act and see what we can do to introduce new legislation. That legislation, as it's currently written, it's just null and void because of this decision. So, is there a way for us to write an update of the John R. Lewis Advancement Act and reach to a cure for what we know is going to be the case in Florida and these other states, Louisiana, and could very well be South Carolina as well? Though I've been called by quite a few people today saying South Carolina has no appetite for doing this and it ain't going to do it. Well, it ain't about me. It may not do it now, and I suspect that's because of my relationship with the governor. But what they're going to do about the person who succeeds me? So we need to tackle this issue now with a new piece of legislation. And I think it's time for us to look at this decision, look at the John R. Lewis Advancement Act, and see whether or not what we can do to create, as the Supreme Court just did, a new way to write legislation that will give us some protection that's been taken away with us. There may be another way. In fact, I know there are other ways to get to some cures that we know they're going to play games with that may not be pre-clearance or whatever we get in Section 5, or may not be result by name, but could be result some other way. Your lawyer's going to have to figure that out. I don't know how to do that. So, number one. The second thing I think we need to do is really see how we can accentuate what we are doing in preparation for November. Because if we get a new House, that will allow us to write a new bill that we can pass out of the House. And the success in the Senate will depend upon what kind of success we have at the Senate. But I can tell you this, we will have to have an overwhelming turnout at the polls in November. A close election will put us in a fight with this administration like you've never seen before. It'll have to be something akin to what they did in Hungary when Viktor Orban, whatever his name is, threw in the towel right away. That's the only way we're going to get this administration to throw in the towel, is to have a victory so overwhelming until there can be no question. So I think that we are at a place where those of us who are legislators need to be sitting down with the civil rights attorneys and the voting rights attorneys and develop legislation that will allow us to pursue a new cure that has not been touched by this decision. And so we won't be ignoring this decision, we'll be finding a new cure. So I think that's where we are. I would hope we can do that because I really think that's our only hope legislatively. And the reason I want to bring the lawyers in now, because their approach is going to be totally different from us legislators. Because we got to do this thing in such a way to get the 218 votes you need in the House, and you got to get it to the Senate in such a way for them to overcome a filibuster or in some way get it through the Senate. I think this can be done, but let me just say this. Don't lose faith. It may be my upbringing in that parsonage that's always sending me back to the book of Hebrews, the 11th chapter, first verse, faith. The substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. We got to keep hope. We may not see it, but let's don't lose faith, for God's sake. And my sake, don't lose faith. I'll you back.
I'm going to quickly, thank you, Representative Clyburn. I'm going to quickly go to Representative Terry Sewell of Alabama, a daughter of Selma, as she, I know, will weave into her comments the point that Congressman Clyburn has just made about the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act. As you know, Congresswoman Sewell has filed this every Congress for years. She has gotten it passed in the last couple of Congresses, not this one yet. So she's been on the front lines of this fight. Congresswoman Sewell, if you will maybe respond to that, and then more broadly to the moment and where we are.
Well, first, let me just say to Derek and all of those at NAACP, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. Well, you've heard from the master, which is Jim Clyburn, but my take on it is similar. This is truly a death nail to the Voting Rights Act. It's going to make it much harder for us to win cases on Section 2. The standard is almost near impossible to reach, but it's going to make it easier for them to have discriminatory maps and racially discriminate against us in the name of partisan politics. It's really just atrocious. As you said, and as Jim was saying, I've been filing and working with our stakeholders like the NAACP, like I see Kristen Kark, is she on as well? Yes. For years, and we have to revise the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act in order to make sure that we cover not just the pre-clearance, not just the known practices, but that we talk about partisan gerrymandering and get rid of it as a way of drawing maps. So we have work to do on the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, but we will take back the House. I'm claiming it. Have to have faith. You also have to talk the talk and walk the walk. And I am claiming it. We're going to take back the House and we're going to once again pass the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Now we're going to have to figure out how we get beyond the Senate, which is why we need to turn out and vote like we've never voted before. You know, I think about the fact that, 61 years ago, John Lewis and those foot soldiers were bludgeoned on a bridge in my hometown for the right of all of us to vote. And they are trying to steal this election and take our vote. And we have to do everything we can to march, to mobilize, to organize. And we who are in these state legislatures and Congress must legislate and must do everything we can to protect that sacred right to vote. I'm reminded of what John said on the last time he was on that bridge. And his body was frail. He was riddled with cancer. It was in 2019, and we were doing the commemorative march across that bridge. And they drove him to the apex, and literally he was being held up by two people, but his voice was strong. And he said, "Never give up, never give in, keep the faith, and keep our eyes on the prize." And that is what we need to do. We need to continue to get into good trouble. We know that the price of freedom is never free, and we have to do our part. We're carrying the baton now. It's our generation. It's our watch, and let's fight.
Thank you, Congresswoman Sewell, and thank you for your fight and leadership. I'm going to come quickly before we close with Attorney Clark to Representative Bobby Scott, 3rd District of Virginia. Representative Scott, your state has been dealing with the issue of redistricting. You might frame this conversation in the moment where you think we are as well.
Well, what Virginia just did is voted to respond to the gerrymandering in North Carolina last year, Texas, Missouri, back to North Carolina. Florida had already scheduled a special session. They're in the process. And we just did exactly what they did. They're mad because we did what they did, but trying to level the playing field. But this decision, as it's already been pointed out, is devastating. As Kristen Clark pointed out, they have promoted the right and privilege to partisan gerrymander and overrides racial discrimination. If your partisan gerrymander has the effect of discriminating against African Americans, the court said that's okay. Blacks just get discriminated against. And so if you could have a map that discriminates against African Americans, if they call it a partisan gerrymander, these guys would just pass it and let it go. That's what we're dealing with. I think the response would be next year passing legislation. It's already pending to prohibit partisan gerrymandering. That would get us a little bit back to where we were before this decision. If you prohibit partisan gerrymandering, a lot of Texas would have to redraw their lines, Virginia would have to redraw the lines, and everybody else. But it'd be a level playing field, and you couldn't play games by discriminating against blacks, calling it partisan gerrymandering. I think people have to recognize that the number one thing we have to do in the next few weeks is take every opportunity you've got to vote. Primaries, Republican primaries, to make sure that Republican candidates, vote them out. Put some more moderate people in. But whatever you got, make sure you vote so that the next Congress that decides this can pass a prohibition on partisan gerrymandering. Now, if the House can do it, even with the Senate, there's a chance that the Senate, the Democrats may be able to take over the Senate. There's a chance. But even if they don't, if we pass that legislation in the House, we ought to take the position that nothing in Congress will take place until the president signs that bill. No appropriations, no legislation, no nothing. We'll just stop the proceedings until he signs that bill, and then people can decide what they want. We won't have any appropriations. We'll just shut down the whole government, because I think it's just that important. There ought to be a handful of Republicans that would sign on to a prohibition against partisan gerrymandering. It's not that radical. So I think that's our strategy. You just have to take the opportunity to vote at every opportunity. That's what people in Virginia did when essentially we picked up 4 votes. We canceled out 4 votes, 4 people that had voted for the SAVE Act, the voter suppression bill, and 4 people that would vote in favor of voting rights. People went to the polls and did that. And they have to go to the polls at every opportunity and make sure the people that serve in the 120th Congress, starting next January, are people that will support voting rights. I think it's going to be political. We can't just depend on the Supreme Court. And that's just the way it is. We can complain about it, but we're not going to be able to do anything about it, except I think the prohibition against partisan gerrymandering is something that is within the possibility of getting done.
Thank you, Representative Scott. And I want to give a shout out. I understand from your home state, the Commonwealth, is Senator Louise Lucas, President pro temp of the Senate, who has been punching left and right and was able to achieve with her colleagues the success we saw in Virginia. I want to close with Attorney Clark. Attorney Clark, a lot of this conversation for the last few minutes has been about legislation and what we might have the opportunity to do. I have learned over the years from you and other smart civil rights and voting rights lawyers, in order to do that, though, we've got to build a record. And that is why it is important to go to community hearings. That is why it is important for legislators and local elected officials to enter stuff in the record. You talked about that a little while ago. So as we close this section, can you bring us back to how everyday people can be a part of building that record in their states and in their communities over the next period of time?
Yeah. So this is our democracy, right? We've got to make it. We've got to protect it. We've got to pass it on. Words from Justice Thurgood Marshall, and I think about those words each and every day. And this is a moment for all of us to reclaim our democracy, to be boots on the ground in our community. People should be using their voice right now. Call your governor, call your state officials, tell them you want fair maps. Tell them that you believe in a democracy where everyone has a voice. Tell them that you reject racial gerrymandering. We will be working to activate NAACP members and concerned citizens in every corner of the country to be meaningful, engaged participants in the legislative process. And we want to make sure that you're going in there not just on defense to push back against any nefarious attempt to dismantle majority Black opportunity districts, but that you're also going with an affirmative message, that you're championing the need for election reform and other changes that will open up the doors to democracy in your state. And we're ready to work with partners at the federal level to champion an updated and revised John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act that prepares us for this moment and all of the continued challenges that we face. And again, we are going to continue to call for a constitutional amendment that provides unqualified support for all of us, for all eligible Americans to be able to exercise their voice and their votes. Buckle up and hydrate. You know, this is a long game. We are not going to fix all of this overnight, but we're also not going to lose 1 second. Yesterday was a day for us to be discouraged, but today is a day where we're rolling up our sleeves and preparing for the fight that lies in front of us.
And that is a perfect note to end this part of the segment on. I want to thank Attorney Clark, Congressman Clyburn, Congressman Bobby Scott, and of course, Representative Terry Sewell of Alabama. Phaedra, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Vincent, and thank you to our panelists. That was a powerful, powerful conversation, and I am so thankful. I don't know about you all, but I'm ready to fight. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves. I'm going to do like General Counsel Clark said, I'm going to hydrate, and I am ready to go because we may be bent, but we are not broken. And so as we transition, I did promise you all some Q&A. We don't have a lot of time, but I did pull a few questions that I saw in the chat. As promised, we will take an FAQ. There are actual hundreds of questions in the chat. We can't answer them all, but we will answer a few. So for those of our representatives and General Counsel Clark, if you're able to stay on, I just have 3 or 4 questions we'll answer now. And then for those of you asking in the chat and then the Q&A, how will you get the FAQ? If you registered for this call, we will send it back out to the email in which you registered for this call. All right. So the first question I got was from actually someone in Louisiana. And they said, what the Louisiana governor has done, will President Trump be able to do the same? And I think they're referring to canceling or trying to move the primaries. Is this something we have to worry about at the federal level as we move towards midterms?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think there are lots of concerns and hypotheticals, and we are making sure that we're just prepared for this moment. Where we have an executive branch that is working with the full support and weight of the courts to carry out an agenda to silence Americans. So we will be prepared for anything that this president may attempt to do to hijack our democracy.
Absolutely. If we stay ready, we don't have to get ready. So this question is from Karama Neal. As you consider lawsuits, what kinds of plaintiffs or situations are you looking for?
Yeah, so people who live in the district where post-Calais redistricting efforts may be afoot. people who are eligible voters, people who participate in the process. Those are strong, clients, strong plaintiffs that we are always looking for. But before we get to the litigation, we've got to make sure that we are bringing our full weight to bear in terms of pushing back against these legislative efforts. So we want people to keep an eye out for the material that we will be providing to make sure that everybody's armed and ready to engage in redistricting in a meaningful way. We want to make sure that we develop that record. We want to make sure that we put officials on notice with crystal clear clarity that they are acting with the intent to discriminate if and when they target majority Black districts or other districts that provide voters of color an opportunity to elect. That's the kind of record that we as civil rights lawyers need once we march to the courtroom to try and push back against these efforts if they're successful.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to do one last question while we have you. This question says, Ms. Clark, is there a risk that state voting rights acts like the Virginia Voting Rights Act could be challenged under the same reasoning that they are a violation of the 15th Amendment? And I'll open that to you and invite Congressman Scott to come back and answer as well.
Yeah. We're not going to preemptively sit down at any stage of this fight. We are proud of those states that under their sovereign state constitution, their state constitutions, have adopted state voting rights acts. They provide important protections for the voters in those states. And I think to be determined whether bad actors try to, attack these important state laws, but we're not going to preemptively surrender. These state voting rights acts are an important tool in the ongoing work to make sure that we all have a voice in our democracy.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Congressman Scott?
Yeah, I don't think the Virginia Voting Rights Act is that vulnerable. The kinds of things that are in there are excessive, extended early vote, better, less restrictive voter ID, Sunday vote, review by the Attorney General, the kinds of things that will protect your right. I think the real threat in the future is the threat, I think Kristen mentioned it, is the loss of the private right of action. Now, that would mean that only the Attorney General could bring these kinds of suits. That is absolutely inconsistent with the legislative intent. But they've already done that with in many cases involving the Department of Education. Many of those cases, what's called disparate impact, when what you show is the law in question or practice in question has a discriminatory effect. Those cases can only be brought by the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights. Well, if we have to wait for this Department of Justice to bring voting rights cases, we'll be waiting a long time. The important thing to do is we've got to make sure the people that will be making these decisions in the next Congress will be people elected in November, and we just have to make sure that the right people are elected and the right decisions are made. That includes Congress. It also includes the state legislature, because they will be the ones, if they try to do redistricting again, if you've got the right people in the legislative seats, they won't be inclined to create mischief. But if we sleep through the election and let the wrong people sit up and be in the majority in the House and Senate with Republican governors, there's no telling what they might do. We've got to make sure we vote like we've never voted before.
Absolutely right. Like we've never voted before. Thank you so much. This has been really informative. There are tons more questions. We just don't have more time, but I'm sure we can work to continue this conversation, right? This is just the beginning of this phase of the battle. So we are going to transition into our states of play. We have a rapid fire round of representatives who are on the front lines in each of our states. We know that the opposition that doesn't want us to vote have a playbook, and they are enacting it like clockwork. And so many of you probably saw the news that as soon as the decision was made, the state of Mississippi said that within, I think it was 21 days or 25 days, they would have a special session to redraw their maps. Florida is in a fight for their lives right now. Louisiana, of course, is the epicenter of this case. And of course, we just closed out in Virginia. And so we are going to bring up a representative from each of those states to give us a state of play in those states. We will start with Virginia. Tyler?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tyler Sterling. I am the National Campaigns Director here at the NAACP. It is so empowering to see so many people on this call. 9 days ago, we just had an election, a statewide election in Virginia. And because of the work of so many of our Virginia leaders, President Cozy Bailey, Political Action Chair Gayleen Knoyton, Karen Jones, so many names. I don't want to leave anybody out, but those three in particular do want to highlight, because of the work that happened in 2025, we were in a position to have this special election and this ballot referendum. And that referendum saw extremely high turnout. So I do want to say, and that positivity that we are keeping on this call, keeping that energy moving, we saw extremely high turnout in Virginia. We saw turnout that rose and got us to a yes election. That yes vote only nearly inched by about 2.8% of that turnout. We saw so many of our Black communities and our target areas surpass that 2025 turnout. So it's showing our voters are paying attention and they are turning out. And we need to keep that positivity energy moving in the state of Virginia. I've seen a lot of questions in the chat about how can I get involved. And so I'll just go through briefly a little bit of the tactics on what we did. Direct voter contact is number one. We got to talk to voters, knocking on doors and making phone calls. That is how we're going to cut through all of the noise that we've seen that is moving through, and particularly getting out that vote in terms of partnership engagement. A lot of folks have said, what'd you do with partners? The Virginia partnership engagement, again, led by the Virginia State Conference under the leadership of President Cozy Bailey, Leader Gayleen Knoyton, and Leader Karen Jones, really had partners coming into space, educating voters on what this referendum meant, dispelling the dis and misinformation that we saw, and then mobilizing the vote. And so throughout Virginia, we were able to see extremely high turnout. And that turnout was because we were able to put this on the ballot. Throughout 2025, the mobilization and efforts that we got to were able to get us to a point where the ballot initiative was made real. And so all of this is done through your power of voting. And so that Virginia election was able to become realized because of our 2025 turnout. And with that, I will pass it to Charles Taylor of the Mississippi State Conference NAACP.
Thank you so much, Tyler. I really appreciate the leadership of Chairman Russell, President Derek Johnson, General Counsel Kristen Clark, as well as Chief of Field Dominic Whitehead. I want to say this: Louisiana versus Calais is a direct result of us winning. In Mississippi, because of redistricting, it was our lawsuit, the Mississippi State Conference lawsuit, along with the national office, where we broke the supermajority in the Senate, in the state legislature, is because of lawsuits that we have been plaintiffs of in Louisiana and in Alabama, that we saw 2 new congressional districts. So the reality of it is we have been winning. What we saw just yesterday with the Supreme Court decision is a blow, but we have to continue to fight. Here's what's going to happen in Mississippi. Last Friday, before the decision came out, our governor, Tate Reeves, announced his intention to have a special session 21 days after the decision for Louisiana versus Calais. The reason being is because it was a lawsuit that the ACLU filed that said that the Supreme Court districts must be redrawn. The district court then said the legislature did not do their job, so they called them into court this week. And so that's why he said that. Now we are in a situation where we're going to have this special session redrawing our Supreme Court districts. What might also be on the table is our state legislative districts, potentially congressional districts, even though Mississippi is a state that has already had its primary. But, so even if it's 26, 28, that part is still up in the air. But I want to be clear to all of you This is about us winning. We're going to continue to win because we're going to continue to fight. And as we all know, when we fight, we win.
Thank you so much, Charles. We are going to kick it over to President Michael McClanahan of the Louisiana NAACP.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank the NAACP's leadership under President Johnson and Chairman Russell and also General Counsel for giving those of us in Louisiana that opportunity and the resources to keep fighting. President Johnson talked about the 3 cases that eviscerated voting rights and the rights of Black and brown people. Pleasant versus Ferguson, Louisiana case. This Calais case, Louisiana. We never live under the illusion that they're going to fight fair. I don't fight fair. And so, we got to continue to fight, as my good friend Charles alluded to, because we're winning. They know we're winning, and we're going to win. We fight at every level. The governor right now has suspended the U.S. House elections that are going on right now. The U.S. Senate elections are going on, but there are local elections that are going on too. We mobilize and galvanize our people to go to the polls because we believe and we know that people power will always win, and our power lies in our ability to vote. And so we're taking people off the streets, get them out the clubs, we get them out of these ball games that they go to get to the polls, because we need everybody voting, because they're afraid of our vote. That's why you have these wins by the Supreme Court. But we know that we're not going to live with that. We've come too far. We've come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord, trusted in His holy word, know that He has never failed. He's never failed us yet. And so we've come too far to turn around. We ain't going to turn around. We're going to stand strong. The governor of Louisiana, he's about to be a one-term governor. Dominique Whitehead, I want to say this loud and clear. Dominique Whitehead and his team about 6 or 8 years ago helped Louisiana elect the only Democratic governor in the South, not once, but twice. We did it then, and we're going to do it again. I tell those in the state of Louisiana, I tell the sons and the grandsons of the Ku Klux Klan, because they went from wearing white hoods to wearing white lab coats and wearing black robes to get ready. We ain't started running, and we ain't about to start running. When we do run, we're going to have a bunch of saying that we win. Because when we fight, we win. And we're always fighting because we are battle tested. And we ain't afraid. And we ain't scared. And we ain't never scared. Come to Louisiana. If you want to get some real fighting in, come to Louisiana. Help us, because we're going to win in the end. Thank you.
All right. We ain't never scared. I know that's right, President McClanahan. We appreciate that. This is so fiery. I am ready to go. We are not stopping. And we are going to kick it over to Genesis Robinson of Equal Ground to talk about what's happening in Florida right this moment.
Yeah, thank you, Phaedra, and good afternoon and good evening to everyone. Thank you to the NAACP for having us. I bring you greetings from Florida, where I lead Equal Ground Education and Action Fund, a Black-led voting rights organization on the ground in Florida, working to protect our democracy and expand political power. As you all may have seen, we are the latest in states who have moved to decimate voting rights and representation for our communities. Just this week, 2 days ago, Ron DeSantis and the Florida legislature pushed through a gerrymandered, unconstitutional, illegal partisan power grab that takes away power from our communities. Unfortunately, this builds upon a map 4 years ago that decimated Black representation, where we saw the seat of Congressman Al Lawson, the seat that Congresswoman Val Demings used to hold, no longer be able to be represented by communities of color. And so this is a real problem in this state. What makes Florida an outlier is that we have what's known as the Fair District Amendments. And so this is very important, because what they did in Florida is a clear violation of the law. The voters of this state over 15 years ago approved amendments that said we don't want our maps to be drawn to favor partisanship, incumbents, and we want them to be drawn to ensure that minorities continue to have an opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. And so that was obviously a clear violation. We didn't stand down on this. We mobilized folks to Tallahassee. to join in this moment, to fight back. And despite all of our efforts, despite all of the public outcry, despite the fact that there is a constitutional amendment that prohibits partisan gerrymandering, we still saw this legislature move forward. In closing, I'll say that this legislature, out of the 28 seats, this map that was passed by our governor was projected to perform 24 of the 28 seats in favor of Republicans, despite them only holding 40% of the partisan voter registration share in this state. That's 85% of the seats in this state, despite only holding 40% of the voter registration share. This is criminal, it's a problem, and we will not stop until we ensure that we lift our voices and roll back this partisan power grab, because it's just not right. And so thank you all for the opportunity. We're getting ready to go on tour. We invite you to join us, equal-ground.com. We'll be traveling the state, talking about the implications of this year's special session, talking about the legislative session, but also talking about ways that you can plug in and help fight back this partisan power grab. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Genesis. And as you all have heard, we are fighting this battle on all fronts. We're fighting it at the federal level. We're fighting it at the state and local level. And I see all of you asking questions in the chat. What can we do? What can I do? And I'm so encouraged that you are ready to take up and fight for this. And so this would not be the NAACP if we did not have a call to action. And given this field team, we have a few calls to action. The biggest one you've heard is to go vote and to organize, but there are multiple ways in which you do it. Some folks are keyboard warriors and you have a great social reach and you have social media. And so we're going to bring up our comms director, my colleague, Dominic Hawkins, to talk about how you can spread this message.
Great. Thanks so much, Phaedra. And good evening, everyone. I'm Dominic Hawkins, Vice President of Communications here at NAACP. And so we're going to talk about some calls to action. We want to make sure that you're able to share this news, inform your audiences, share it with your family and friends, and tell them what's at stake in an easy and digestible way. So what you're seeing on the screen now are several graphics that we will make available to everyone on this call, right? So to go over a couple of message points that we touched on earlier. Right now, we're at a position where extremist politicians, they have the ability to silence Black voices because of this Supreme Court ruling. We just want to make sure that's easily understood, easily shareable. Next, we've got a couple of statistics from research done by Fair Fight Action, showing that up to 25 to 30% of the Congressional Black Caucus could lose their seats because of this decision, right? And 2 out of 5 Southern districts where Black voters are the majority could be wiped out. You know, and then lastly, we're showing that we want to make sure that the calls to action are easily encapsulated, so people can know that this is a blow to our democracy, but we can fight back. We're not powerless. We will fight back at the ballot box at this November's midterm elections. And to do that, we want you to sign up to volunteer with us and to verify your voter registration. And again, we will make sure that everyone gets these graphics so you can share this with your friends, your families, on your networks, in your group chats and whatnot, as well as the links to sign up and volunteer with us and to verify your voter registration, because when that time comes, we want to flood the ballot boxes with the votes so we can make sure we elect people who are going to look out for us. And so next up, we have Chief Dominic Whitehead and Amara Fenoy, who will dive deeper into how you can get involved and how you can spread the word. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dominic, and everyone who presented this evening. We are at the end of our call, but you know we're not going to end this without a real and a full call to action. Now, our Office of General Counsel, in a moment ago, Ms. Kristen Clark said, hydrate. Y'all, we got to hydrate because we are in for a fight. Because folks write hydrate in the chat. We got to make sure we stay hydrated all year long because we are in for a fight. We are ready to go and ready to fight. There's 3 things that the General Counsel lifted up that we must do in this moment. 1, we have to request and push for a constitutional amendment to guarantee the right to vote. We must ask for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act to be passed by Congress. And we want to restore fairness to the Supreme Supreme Court. But we cannot do any of that if we do not mobilize folks to the poll, register folks to vote this year, right now, in this moment. There's nothing more important in this moment right now than engaging folks this election cycle, getting involved with NAACP, getting involved with your units across the country, and begin to organize community by community. We are engaging in over 34 congressional districts this cycle. 34 congressional districts this cycle. We are playing in states up and down the ballot. We are playing in the South, the Northeast, and all the way on the West Coast. That is how important this election cycle is. So get ready, hydrate. I'm going to kick it over to my colleague, Amari Fenori, National Mobilization Director, to tell you what you need to do now in this moment, right after you leave this call, what you need to do tonight. Amari, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dominic, and letting us know that we need to flood the ballot box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop in the chat our link to verify your registration. So our goal is to ensure not only are you registered to vote, but also everyone in your household. So once you register or you check ensure that your registration is clear, send it to 5 other individuals, your friends, your family members, to ensure that they are also registered to vote. We want to ensure that their ballots have not been purged. We want to make sure they're able to submit a safe ballot when it comes to the upcoming elections. But also within that, once you verify your registration, we need all hands on deck for this election cycle. As Dominic mentioned, we are going to be in 34 congressional districts, and we want to make sure that we are mobilizing people by having phone calls, town halls, door knocking. We want to ensure that everyone has their boots on the ground and ensuring that Black voters turn out this election cycle. So once you see this, what I want you to do is sign up to be a volunteer by texting volunteer to 20707. Text volunteer to 20707 to join us in the fight to ensure that we are mobilizing Black voters. So text volunteer to 20707. What we are doing is we are in those 34 congressional districts, but we are also all over the US. So we want to make sure that everyone has the ability to phone bank, to knock on doors, to send postcards to voters to ensure that they're getting out to vote in November. But also for those key congressional districts, each of our volunteers will get their own 25 voters to contact, and they'll be within a 5-mile radius of your home so that you can go knock on their doors. So you can send them a postcard, so you can send them a text message, build a personal relationship and build community to make sure that they're joining us when it comes to town halls, they're educating themselves about what's on the ballot, but also to ensure that they're getting out to the ballot box and they're getting their friends and family out to the ballot box as well. So again, I'm going to drop it in the chat. Text volunteer to 20707 and ensure that we win in November. And I'll kick it back to you, Phaedra.
Thank you so much, Dominic, Amari, and Dominic. Really great calls to action. I can tell that everyone on here is checking their registration. They're ready to mobilize. They're going to sign up to volunteer with us, and we are ready to go because we are unstoppable. And as we come to a close, I am so honored to bring up our chairman, Mr. Leon Russell.
Thank you, Phaedra, and thank every one of the thousands of people who have joined this call this evening. We are thrilled that you are here. We will be even more thrilled if you do all of the things that Dominic and Amari ask us to do. It is essential that we understand that we are in a long-term fight. Yes, we will have some short-term strategy. Absolutely. Short-term, we will vote in 2026. You will make sure that all of your neighbors, all of your friends, all of your relatives, everybody in your household gets out and votes in 2026. We must follow the people of Hungary in sending a message to those in power. We can do it if we vote together. Secondly, we will implement a long-term strategy. After all, we have to play a long game to do what is necessary here. You've heard it. We've got to adopt the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We have got to fortify the protections of voting rights across this country. Quite frankly, nothing is clearer today than the fact that we must reform the United States Supreme Court. That means look at the structure and figure out how to change it. Thirdly, we have told you consistently, there must be a United States constitutional amendment to protect the right to vote and to guarantee the right to vote to everyone who is qualified in this nation to vote. That is absolutely essential. So we will run a short-term strategy, a long-term strategy. We will ask the assistance of everyone. You don't have to be an NAACP peer, but we want you to be an NAACP peer if you will. If you are a member of another organization, make sure that that organization is mobilizing your membership to ensure that everyone gets out to vote. Partnerships work. When we work together, when we fight together, we win together. Those are essentials. Now, on a lighter note, I'd like us to all wish Congressman Bobby Scott a happy birthday. Today is his birthday, and we should all wish Bobby a very happy birthday. Volunteer. Call at least text 20707 and volunteer to be a part of this army. We need you to step out this evening, join the fight to ensure that you and all of your neighbors have the right to vote, that your children have the right to vote. That's what this is about. Short term, show the people your strength by voting in 2026. Long term, let's change the laws to protect our right to vote. Thank you all for being with us tonight. Thank all of our presenters who have been here. Thank our leadership from the United States Congress. Thank you, President Johnson. Thank you, Phaedra. Thank you, Dominic. And thank all of the staff of the NAACP for this evening's presentations. Have a good night.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Last thing I'll say is folks always want to know if they will get the recording, and you absolutely will. Just give us a little extra time because we want to package those FAQs for you. And so you will get a recording, you will get a version of the slide deck, and you will get the FAQs. Just give us a few extra days to package all that up and get back to you. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful night.